The year is 1989, and Michael Keaton is Batman. It was the year that Motley Crue introduced us to Dr. Feelgood. The Simpsons debuted their very first episode, and both Sega and Nintendo released brand new hardware. But we're not here to talk about that time Harry met Sally, because today we're counting down Electronic Gaming Monthly's top reviewed games of 1989. This is the start of a 16-week series where we alternate between the best and worst games from 1989 to 1996. It's a journey that'll take us from the final days of the Nintendo Entertainment System through the 16-bit era and all the way up to the rise of the PlayStation, Saturn, and Nintendo 64. We're going to cover a lot of ground, starting with 1989. This was Electronic Gaming Monthly's very first year, which helps to explain why they only reviewed 52 games. Here are the 10 best. After having mixed success with a Master System, Sega decided to take a more aggressive approach when launching the Genesis. One of the things they did was spend the money on high-profile athletes and coaches for a brand new lineup of sports games, including Pat Riley basketball, James Buster Douglas knockout boxing, and Arnold Palmer tournament golf. Of this series, only one of them managed to score high enough to warrant a place on this list, and that's Tommy Lasorda baseball. Like most early 16-bit games, Electronic Gaming Monthly was blown away by the visuals. Tommy Lasorda Baseball is without a doubt the best-looking video baseball I've ever played, raved Steve Harris. And Semrat agreed, saying, with the new capabilities of the 16-bit machines, baseball has come one step closer to reality. Both critics gave it an 8 out of 10. Don and Jim weren't as blown away by the 16-bit graphics as their colleagues. Giving it a 7, Don explains that the game itself is good, with most of the features found in baseball. The way it tracks the league is cool, but other than that, Tommy Lasorda Baseball is about the same as the others, with 16-bit looks. With 2 critics giving it 8s and the other 2 giving it 7s, this very first Genesis baseball game averaged a total of 7.5. If you don't think a memorable cover is important, then just ask Iron Sword, Wizards and Warriors 2. Nearly 3 decades after release, just about the only thing people remember about this game is that Fabio was on the cover. The male model turned crackpot also appeared on the cover of Electronic Gaming Monthly, where they ended up giving the game an average score of a 7.5 out of 10. The general consensus was that Iron Sword was a significant improvement over the first Wizards and Warriors. Even though the game requires the same precise jumps that I hated about the original, starts Steve, Iron Sword is so big and has so much to offer, most of the competition pales in comparison. Ed agreed, saying that Iron Sword is longer, harder, more involving, and deeper, with some very different features that make it exceptional. The two suggested that Iron Sword is a must-own, but still only gave it an 8 out of 10. Once again, Don and Jim weren't as thrilled. The game requires precise movement that detracts from the play in several areas, but it is definitely an above-average title, concluded Don. Jim notes that he has nothing bad to say about Iron Sword, and yet still only gives it a 7 out of 10. The fact that games with 7s are sneaking onto this top 10 list is just a testament to the fact that EGM only reviewed a handful of games in 1989. This wouldn't even make the cut in any other year. Given Nintendo's penchant for wanting to resurrect their old-school franchises, you would think that they would have rebooted Adventures of Lolo a long time ago. Of all the classic games, this adorable puzzler is best suited for an eShop release. It stars a likable hero, takes place in a colorful world, and is one of Nintendo's few 8-bit trilogies. The critics at EGM agree with me. Or they did in 1989, when they gave the game nothing but 7s and 8s. To put it bluntly, I think EGM was confused by Adventures of Lolo. Steve argued that it's an absolutely entrancing game, noting that while it may not be high on shoot-'em-up action, it does have gameplay that is addicting beyond belief. Don liked the pretty good graphics and music, saying that they enhance the action-strategy hybrid that is highly addictive. On the other hand, Jim concluded that the game is not unbeatable, despite the number of rooms that you must overcome. Well, that's good to know. Perhaps the most baffling review came from Steve, who ended up giving it an 8 out of 10. He starts by saying, "I feel sorry for this game." Why? Well, he doesn't say. He compares it to Solomon's Key and notes that the kiddie graphics disguise a game that's for all ages and filled with countless hours of enjoyment. But none of that's worth feeling sorry about. Had he known that Nintendo would publish 2 more sequels, I kinda doubt he would have started his review that way. Adventures of Lolo averaged a 7.5. Thunder Force 2 is a good game. I think most of us can agree on that. But much like the original, the 1989 shoot-'em-up was quickly overshadowed by Thunder Force 3, one of the single greatest 16-bit games of all time. But Electronic Gaming Monthly had no idea how much better the sequel was going to be, which helps to explain why most of the editors gave it 8s and called it another example of how much better a 16-bit cart can be. You haven't seen great graphics until you've seen Thunder Force 2, raves Ed. Easily the best visuals in a shoot-'em-up, with both horizontal and vertical fighting sequences. Jim agreed, explaining that Thunder Force 2 has graphics and sound that blow me away. The game is impressive as well, with a ton of power-ups that boost your weapons to new heights. Yeah, just wait until they see Thunder Force 3. Don was the only EGM critic to not give the game an 8, calling it a very good game and concluding that this is one shooting game that has teeth. The only real complaint I could find was in Steve's review, when he explained that the overhead sequences are not as strong as the side scenes, which may help to explain why they completely ditched it in the third installment. Either way, Thunder Force 2 managed an impressive 7.75 out of 10. If you had asked me in 1989 what Game Boy launch title was going to be remembered 3 decades later, I probably would have told you that the answer would be Super Mario Land. Obviously. I mean, you're a fool to bet against a Mario game made by Nintendo. But lo and behold, that didn't turn out to be the case. According to number crunchers, Tetris is not only the best-selling game of all time, but also a game that is still being remade to this very day. Hell, I reviewed a brand new version of Tetris just a few weeks ago. None of the EGM critics seemed even remotely aware of the importance Tetris would have on this video game industry. Many called it the perfect portable game, since you can't finish it and it remains constantly absorbing throughout. David explains that it's easy to learn, yet challenging to play. Ed called it the perfect match for anyone. Even Martin, who gave the lowest score, concluded that Tetris is very addicting. Weirdly enough, all 4 of the critics got hung up on the 2-player video link mode. Don't get me wrong, I think the multiplayer mode is certainly fun, and I spent hours going head-to-head with my dad back in the day. But it's surprising to see so much time spent in a mode that very few people even remember. Pulling in mostly 8s, Tetris ended up averaging a solid 7.75 out of 10. Of all the games we've talked about today, it's Blazing Lasers that has the largest disparity of scores. While most have been in the range of 7s and 8s, this TurboGrafx-16 shoot-'em-up managed to score a 6, all the way up to a 9. I'd like to believe that this led to a lot of spirited debates amongst the staff, but let's be realistic, they were probably too busy playing 30 games an issue to care what other people said. Let's go ahead and start out with the lowest score. Ed called the game a slightly better than average shooter, with nicely detailed backgrounds, intense opponents, and more action, especially in the higher levels, than most can handle. He gave the game a 6 out of 10 and called it repetitive. Don disagreed, calling Blazing Lasers outstanding. I'm not normally a shooter fan, but this may make me a believer. Beyond calling it his favorite TurboGrafx-16 game, he took the time to call the final boss a bitch. This is one of the few times EGM had to bleep out what was deemed profanity at the time. Martin was just as impressed with the game as Don, raving that it's definitely the best space shooter available on any system. They love the multitude of power-ups and the stunning backgrounds and enemies. He called the game near perfect and gave it a 9. This is a review crew divided, with Don and Martin naming it one of the best games of the year, and Steve and Ed being less than impressed. When we average out the scores, Don and Martin have the last laugh, because here it sits at the number 5 spot. Take that, Ed. Super Mario Land is a weird game. Not because it trades Bowser for Tatanga and the Mushroom Kingdom for Sarasa Land, but rather because it's the first Mario game that could be classified as a 2D shoot-'em-up. Okay, so maybe the majority of the game is the usual platforming fun we're used to. But why did Nintendo abandon the Gradius-style shooting stages? That's just the kind of thing I want to see in Super Mario Odyssey. I guess I was the only one excited to see Mario in an airplane, because not a single critic at Electronic Gaming Monthly mentioned these shoot-'em-up stages. Instead, they gushed over the new characters, one-ups, hidden coins, and excellent scrolling graphics. Even though it's in black and white and on a 2-inch screen, Super Mario Land is a fantastic game that is, above all, very fun to play, says Steve. Ed called it easily the best Game Boy cart, not realizing that Tetris would be the only launch game that people still play 3 decades later. The only criticism came from a few editors complaining that it was a bit too easy. With only 12 screens, as Steve puts it, you could quickly go through the game in just a matter of minutes. While this may be Mario's shortest adventure, it still managed to impress the critics enough to warrant a spot on this top 10 list. The original Mega Man was a good game with a lot of potential. Mega Man 2, on the other hand, was a great game that more than lived up to its potential, which helps to explain why many consider it to be the best game in the long-running franchise. While I personally prefer Mega Man 3, I'm certainly not going to complain that this much-improved sequel managed to make it all the way up to number 3 on our countdown. Mega Man 2 is one of the best games I've played in a long time, proclaimed Steve as he gave it an 8 out of 10. It has a perfect blend of action and surprise that is usually seen only in games like Super Mario. Ed agreed, calling it a worthy successor to the original Mega Man. Even Don, who's been super critical this entire list, admits that Mega Man 2 was one of those must-buy games of the year. If you can win over Don, then you know it must be a great game. If you're looking for negatives, you won't find many here. The one that stands out is that Jim thought it was easier than the first game, but he concluded that it wasn't much of a distraction. They all highly recommended Mega Man 2, but only gave it 8s. Still, those 8s were enough to make this sequel one of the best reviewed games of 1989. The Legendary Axe is one of the best side-scrolling action games nobody remembers. You would think that a game this good would have longer legs, but it often felt like NEC did everything in its power to bury EGM's second favorite game of 1989. Between the miserable ads and the underwhelming sequel, it's easy to see why few people cared and the series was ultimately destined for obscurity. I think it's safe to say that life isn't fair. This is how Rastin should have been done, raved Ed. Multiple paths, an attack meter that takes time to build, and numerous hidden pitfalls. Axe is not as easy as it appears to be. Jim called it a great game, and like Ed, called it Rastan with better graphics. Legendary Axe is everything you could want in a game. Steve was even more impressed, giving the game a 9 out of 10. Legendary Axe is one of my favorites. The execution is brilliant, the many power-up options welcome, and the game is a joy to behold. Okay, so the wording's a little funny, and he clearly ran out of room to say more, but his enthusiasm comes through loud and clear. I don't want to speak for the editors of EGM, but I think they would all agree with me that you should figure out a way to play the Legendary Axe as quickly as possible, especially if you're looking for Rastan with better graphics. Electronic Gaming Monthly's second annual Game of the Year was also their best reviewed game. While this may sound obvious, I assure you that won't be the case as we move forward through the years. But instead of looking into the future, let's take a moment to reflect on how great Ghouls and Ghosts is. This was one of the first must-own titles for the fledgling Genesis, and it's a game that cemented the system's dedication to incredible arcade ports. The only people that didn't like this port were the people that didn't like Ghouls and Ghosts to begin with. Thankfully, none of those people worked at Electronic Gaming Monthly in the late 1980s. scoring straight 9s across the board. Everybody loved Ghouls and Ghosts. Easily the best cartridge game ever made. The best game for the Genesis so far. Just what a 16-bit game should be. These were just a few of the glowing comments left by the stunned critics. They didn't even mind that the port wasn't developed by Capcom, as they were too busy raving about the great 3D effects and the animated backgrounds that are second to none. Martin went as far as to say that the awesome graphics and super detailed characters, combined with great gameplay, make this one of the best all-around games I've ever played on any machine. Now, this truly was a masterpiece. Beyond simply earning the highest review average, Ghouls and Ghosts also picked up Electronic Gaming Monthly's coveted Best Game of the Year award. It was also named the best sequel to an existing game, snagged the best graphics in a video game award, picked up the prize for worst stomach problem in a game, and it was honored for having the coolest boss attackers. It was also the biggest reason why the Genesis was named the best new video game system of the year. Hey, thanks for watching the first episode of the Electronic Gaming Monthly Best and Worst. We're going to be debuting a brand new episode every Wednesday throughout the summer, including next week when we'll be talking about the worst games of 1989. So here's the question of the day. What's your favorite game from 1989? Simple. Let me know in the comments below. I'm currently hard at work on a bunch of reviews, including Drifting Lands and a preview of Renzo Racer. So I recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.